Hey guys, welcome back to episode 6 of the Into the Deep podcast with Father Theodore and me, David Gergus. Today's episode is on service. We sit down to discuss the different types of services, why everyone should serve, and some of the pros and cons to serving. We hope everyone learned something from this episode, and we'll see you guys for the next one. All right, enjoy. So when I hear the word service, I instantly think of Sunday school. What do you think is wrong with that kind of thought process?
I think most people, when they think of service within like the Coptic church, they think of Sunday school. I think of my Sunday school teachers, people who taught me, that kind of stuff. But I think that service can be and should be much more broad than that, because Sunday school actually is a very important service. I'm teaching youth, I'm teaching young people, I'm maybe sharing the faith, I'm discipling them. All of those things are vital things. But there are many other things in the church that the church needs for it to function. The church needs maintenance, the church gets clean, the church has something like this that we're doing, the church has audio-visual stuff, the church has the diaconate. There's lots of services. And actually, I'm always encouraged when I see new ideas from people that they can, add on to this. I mean, this service that we're doing is because you said, hey, we can try something and maybe bring something out to people who wouldn't otherwise see it, right? And so now we're able to serve a population that maybe wouldn't have served otherwise.
I guess I think it's a little weird because when I think of Sunday school, one of the reasons I think of that as a service is because of how structured and, it's every week and there's even a curriculum that gets passed out. But with other services that you mentioned, like maybe not this one because we do it pretty frequently, but something like cleaning the church or maintenance, that's something that's not as constant and pretty sporadic. And so I think that kind of...
Well, I actually, to be honest, I might push back a little bit on that. Mm-hmm. I think it depends on how serious I take the service. For example, at my church, we have a group of people who clean the church, and very regularly, weekly, they have a schedule and they have a time to go and they have the things that they're supposed to clean and they have supplies that they buy and all that kind of stuff. So I think what is maybe at the heart of maybe the issue is I see Sunday school as an important, valuable service that ought to be done in a systematic and organized way, which is great. But actually, all services, what is required from me is faithfulness. Imagine, like when I think about any service, I should think about it as, am I doing this as if it's my job? Or am I doing this as if my success sort of hinges on how well this thing goes? A lot of times, even people in Sunday school, unfortunately, they would tell you that, I planned this lesson during the sermon, or I planned this lesson yesterday, or whatever the case may be. You wouldn't do that on a big project at work that your CEO is going to come and be there to listen in on, right? You would plan that for weeks. And so when you're thinking about these services, I would think about them as I'm serving Christ himself. And so when I'm serving Christ himself, I have to give him my best. And so if I'm giving him my best, it would be more structured. Sure, cleaning doesn't need, for example, like a curriculum, but it does need some seriousness in whatever service that you're going to be involved in.
Okay, so if Sunday school isn't the only service, and there are many other ones that you mentioned, how would you define it in its core? What is service?
I think the way I would look at it is if we are all part of the body of Christ, right? And there are many things, like in a physical body, that the body needs for it to function. Anything that I am doing within the church to allow it to function, either function in its evangelical role, function in its teaching role, function in its spiritual role, can be part of what I can consider service. When we teach the catechism course for newcomers, this is a service. When we house the homeless, that's a service. When, like I mentioned before about cleaning, or when I serve in the diaconate. Actually, I wish maybe we even have another podcast about the diaconate. I wish actually we would take it a little bit more seriously that it's an actual service. I think really what happens for the most part is people are like, yeah, I'm a deacon, so on Sunday, as long as I come early enough, I show up. But if it was really a true service, you would have readings assigned and who's going to say them, and you might have read them before, so you know what you're going to say. You have a sort of like a syllabus or an outline of the particular hymns we're going to say that day, and we take it a little bit more seriously rather than sort of like whoever's just coming up and just kind of
everything's kind of on the fly.
Yeah.
So why don't you? I'm curious why you don't enforce that.
Actually, that's something that I would love to influence. I want to get to that point. I think that's something that in my mind is a vision for the future that we would take it with the level of seriousness that it deserves. Because if you think about it, I don't want to maybe take too much time about the diaconate, but if you think about that service in particular, it has a very huge impact on how everyone else experiences liturgy, right? I'm sure you went to a liturgy before where the deacons didn't know the hymns or they weren't saying it right or whatever. It's not really conducive to prayer, right? And so when I'm saying those things, it's not because I want to have, the nicest, fanciest deacons that say all the big hymns. It's really not about that. It's about my job as a deacon is to create or make sure that the environment is conducive to prayer, right? The hymns of the church are beautiful, but they're not beautiful if we're saying them wrong, or they're not beautiful if we're saying them in the wrong time, or if we're not all on the same page, or if we're out of sync, or whatever the case. And so that service actually takes preparation. It doesn't magically happen. Any choir, even when they all know the song that they're going to sing, they sing it together to see how we sound with one another. And they even I'm not super experienced with choirs, but they even have stuff where it's like, you stand here and you stand here and you stand here because my voice is this and your voice is that, and sort of so that it can sound nice when they're projecting their voices. And so to take it with that level of seriousness, I think would enhance the service for everybody involved, the deacons themselves, the priests, the congregation, people who are coming into the church for the first time. One of the best ways actually to be like a missionary church, a church that would attract people, is to have beautiful liturgical prayers. So, there's lots of ways I can take any service that, like I said, defining service as something that is going to help the church do its functions. And I can enhance it by, taking it a little bit more like seriousness.
So you mentioned preparation as kind of something that is required for certain services. Do you think all services require preparation? And if not, does that mean that some services are more important than others? I know they're all equally as important in the main objective of serving, Christ, but are some... I would assume Sunday school is probably a pretty important one.
I guess, they're all important. If you think about it, for example, yesterday it was super icy, right? There's a bunch of people at church. They spent a couple of hours cleaning off all the ice and removing it so that people could walk. To me, that's absolutely critical, right? If people didn't do it, we couldn't go to church. But then again, that doesn't take very much preparation. It doesn't take really very much knowledge. Maybe you know how to use a shovel, but it doesn't take any sort of dogmatic knowledge. Also, for example, the person's state of life at that moment. I wouldn't worry, for example, of them being a stumbling block. Within reason, they wouldn't be a stumbling block shoveling ice. But if someone is a Sunday school teacher, then they are being looked up to by their students, presumably. So then they ought to live a life that is worthy of that, right? So there are maybe different services, and maybe you would hold people to different standards in those services depending on the sensitivity of the service that they're doing. For example, we have a lost sheep service, a service that is going after those that maybe are a little bit far away from the church. Maybe they're dealing with drug addiction or alcohol addiction or whatever. For whatever reason, they're far away from the church. The type of people that I would choose in that sort of role would be people who are gifted that they are compassionate. Maybe they are gifted in the sense that they have experienced those things and have overcome them by the grace of God. So maybe they kind of know where the person's been. And also very strong in their faith, so that you wouldn't have them bring that person that's a lost sheep, wouldn't drag them down, right? So I wouldn't bring, for example, a pre-servant kid and take them, go, find the lost sheep, because you might find them, after weeks or months being affected negatively by the lost sheep that they were intending to serve. So I think different services have different roles, different needs, different criteria of who would be successful in those services. But I don't necessarily, I would like to shy away from, well, this is more important than that. They all are serving an important function.
Should everyone serve?
I think we actually have a biblical mandate to serve. I think that our Lord Jesus Christ, he's the one, he said, he's the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And so if our goal in life is to unite with Christ and to become more Christ-like, he lived a life of service, right? And so we ought to live a life of service as well.
You don't think that's a little far-fetched, I guess, in a way? Because I know we strive to be like Christ, but yeah. None of us will ever get to that point. I know that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but is it realistic to truly live a life of service?
I think that the important thing, if I look at it from the standpoint of, I can't do what Christ did. He gave up his whole life for service. His whole life was service. And maybe when I think about it from the place I am at my life currently, that seems unfathomable. There's no way I can do that. I would say, like, let me take a small step. What small thing can I do? What service, even if I can't commit to a regular service, many times actually, like on the church groups, I'll message and I'll say, like, actually just the other day, I was looking for somebody to there was a needy family, and I was trying to get them some help and whatever. And so, like, I can serve, even if they're in frequent ways. I can begin in that way and sort of dip my toes into service, learn about service, see the blessings that come from service, and then be encouraged. If I look at it like the mountain that you described, of course, no one's going to serve. Say, well, if I can't be like Christ, I might as well not serve. I don't think anybody's going to serve.
Do you think that people have a misconception of service that, like, it should be easy, or I should only do what I'm good at, or some people probably don't want to do certain services because they feel they're not equipped to, or they just don't like it?
Absolutely. Actually, I think all of those things. I think that a lot of times we serve because of maybe like, oh, my group of friends are in this service, so I want to serve too, or I like these servants, so I'll serve with them, or I like Abuna, so I'll serve with him, or we serve because I like these kids, so I want to stay with them. And then even you have, like, when it comes to Sunday school, they'll say, like, well, I want to move up with my kids because those are people that I serve. Or maybe they'll say, like, I like this particular service because I'm good at it. All those things are okay, but not ideal. What I mean by that is, it's great if you like the people you serve with. It's great if you like the priest that you serve with. It's great if you feel like the service that you're doing matches your talents. But I don't think that should be my only driver, my only motivating factor. And I think many, many times that's what it ends up being. So if the service becomes difficult, if I have an issue within the service, if I have a problem with either a fellow servant or a coordinator or the priest or the people I'm serving, then all of a sudden you say, well, this service isn't for me. And that's when you find people like dipping in and out of service, deciding to serve and then quitting and that sort of thing, because they're looking for their comfort, or maybe, God forbid, they're looking for prestige. Like, I'm a servant, and to be looked at as a servant would mean, I have some level of holiness or righteousness just by virtue of the fact of my position. And that's not the way that we should, in an ideal world, approach service. Service is really for the sake of others, right? It's not for the sake of myself or my vainglory or whatever the case may be.
I think it's hard to kind of have the mindset of you're serving for someone else in a way that's kind of almost not hurting your life, but you're not serving yourself.
I think actually the best way to approach service is with the mindset that this will be inconvenient for me. This will not be like, this will not make my life easier. It'll make my life harder in some ways. I would never want to overburden any servants. Okay, there's limits, and I think that's the role of the coordinators and the priests, to make sure that they are with wisdom, not being overbearing towards anybody. But I, as a servant, should come in with the mindset of like, I'm here to help. I'm here to be inconvenienced. That's what I'm doing for this hour, for this week, for this day that I'm coming in and doing whatever I'm doing. And when I have that mindset, then I can roll with punches a lot better. You know what I mean? Then I'm okay if like a kid is misbehaving. It's like, well, I should expect that. Or a parent says this to me, or Abuna asked me to do this thing that I wasn't really in the mood to do. You know what I mean? If I come in with that mindset, it changes a lot. When I come in the mindset of I'm here to transmit my depth of knowledge that I have, or whatever the case may be, which happens sometimes. Happens in Sunday school, happens in maybe with the deacons, it happens with many services. If I come in with that mentality, yeah, I'm going to be stumbled, and I'm going to stumble others actually in the process.
Have you ever encountered a situation where a servant was doing too much to the point where it was, negatively impacting their life in a way that wasn't just an inconvenience, but it was like starting to get worrisome?
Sure. I mean, there needs to be some discernment, right? Sometimes there is, like, people have what I like to call the problem of saying no. They want to say yes. They want to help. They want to please the person in front of them, and that's an admirable goal and a good quality. But actually, it ends up backfiring both for the person who says yes and for the person that's asking, because when the person gets burnt out, many times what happens is they sort of drop everything at the same time, because they're like, I'm fed up. I've had it up to here. I can't do anymore. And so I think that's incumbent on two people. I think it's important for that person to sort of be aware of themselves. I think it's important for them to, have that discussion with their spiritual father. But I think it's important also for the coordinators and the leaders of the church to sort of have an eye out for that sort of thing. You see someone who maybe looks like, yeah, you know what, they've kind of had more than their fair share, or they look like they may need a break, and
What about the case of like multiple services? So like maybe I'm in a Sunday school class serving, and it doesn't look like I'm doing too much because I'm just there for my allotted time.
Sure.
But then someone else asks me to do another service, and I say yes. And then someone else needs help, with setting up this thing, and I say yes. And it's getting to the point where maybe they can't say no. How would you?
Well, that's my point. Like, I think that I have to, if I end up in that position, I need to find a way out of that, whether it be, speak to my spiritual father or speak to the people who I said yes to. I need to apologize and said, I've overcommitted, because you're going to end up being detrimental to yourself. I think what's interesting, or what is maybe a little bit more difficult to discern, is how do I know if I am being too lenient on myself, and saying, well, like, oh, this is too much for me. I have too much between work and school and my, my family and everything. I can't serve. Mm-hmm. And where it's like truly where actually there is no more time or energy to serve, and therefore I shouldn't. And I think that's where having objective advice from my spiritual father can be very helpful.
I think that kind of not contradicts, but there's like a problem with, if we establish that service shouldn't be easy, and sometimes you won't be doing things that you enjoy,
sure,
I'm much less likely to push myself or really look at it from like an objective, like, do I have time or do I just not enjoy this thing? So I'm gonna say
that's why that's the importance of having sort of guides with me, right? For me, my heart can deceive me. If it's something I don't like, all of a sudden I don't have time for it. And then, if how many times have you, even yourself, even outside of service, somebody, asks you, hey, can you come do this? Or you want to come out into this thing, and you don't really want to. So then I have a million excuses and reasons why I got something better to do. Mm-hmm. But then, maybe when your good friends, tell you to do something or ask you to do something, all of a sudden I clear my calendar and I can make it,
right?
Because I want to. And so there is a level of being honest with myself, and even more so, taking the advice of my spiritual guide. I actually really would encourage people, before they say yes to a service, to say, like, the best phrase to say is like, let me ask my father confession and I'll get back to you. Because actually, even for those like people pleasers who really want to say yes, it gives you an out that is not a no. People are afraid to say no. Mm-hmm. And say, well, I'm not saying no to you. I just want to make sure. I want to check with my spiritual father. And then that gives you time to think. It gives you time to, it's not a lie. I genuinely, I'm going to go to my spiritual father and say, they suggested X, Y, Z, what do you think? And it gives me a little bit of time to think about it. Actually, I would even suggest that, even if my spiritual father is the father of my church, I could say, what, when we sit in confession, can we talk about this? And then that gives me an opportunity to sort of like take a little bit of time, and then we can talk about it, we can discuss it. That way you don't feel on the spot, like, okay, they need this thing and it's sort of mission critical and he wants me to say yes and I don't know how to say no, so I'm going to say yes.
That was what I was going to say. What if you're a father of confession? I mean,
sure.
I don't know how typical it is for you to discuss service with your father of confession, but
sure.
I'm assuming if your father of confession is not at the church that you're serving at, there's no visibility there. And if you're a person who doesn't see it as an issue, probably won't bring it up, because you're doing something good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things here. Yeah, I agree with you. Like if my father of confession is not at the church that I serve at, maybe it wouldn't occur to me to speak to him about those things. That's why sort of my guidance here is saying like, hey, actually, that is something you should talk about. I should get into the practice of my major decisions in my life should be with the guidance of God and with my spiritual father, so that I can be sort of more assured that I'm doing things in line with God's will and according to my abilities and the grace that God has given me, rather than sort of kind of flying solo. I do agree that there are maybe some like benefits and pros and cons, about having the priest that I confess to be the same priest who is at my church or that I serve under. The pros of that is that person knows you really well. They know your ins and outs. They know the things that are really good for you. They know the things that are beneficial for you. Someone who serves with you knows you pretty well because they see you pretty often. Someone who confesses with you, maybe they won't know you as well unless you maybe confess with them for a long time. So there are some good and bad things about it. On the other hand, if someone is confessing to someone who is not from your church, you could be with 100% certainty know that they're not giving you an answer based on a personal need.
Right.
Like, oh, I really need this service, so I'm going to push you to serve. Although I think for the most part, the priests have the discernment themselves to sort of, they would never ask for a service for you to your detriment, or at least they shouldn't, right? So, I mean, that would be the expectation.
What are some, I know we discussed not the cons of serving, but like the struggles of serving, and how you might not always like it, and it is an inconvenience at times.
Sure.
What are some of the benefits to serving now?
So many things, actually. When you think about services that are like teaching services, many people, most people who do those things, they end up saying, I've learned so much. I learned so much because I had to prepare my lessons. I had to review things that I thought I knew, but I didn't quite know as well as I thought I did. For example, in hymns, right? I may think I know how to say a hymn that if everybody's saying it alongside me, I could say it. But when I'm teaching a hymn, it's a whole different thing, right? I need to know it perfectly, right? So I review it and I become better and stronger at it, okay? I get the blessing, of course, the blessings of God for doing good works, blessings, rewards in heaven and earthly rewards. When you think about services that are discipleship focused, like Lost Sheep or Sunday school, things like that, it can be for me an encouragement to continue in my spiritual life. Many times people will say, I just talked to my kids about, confessing, and I haven't confessed in a month. I really want to make sure that I'm on it so that I can stand in front of them with a straight face and say, confession is important. Or, for example, when I'm, with my friends on a Friday night, and I'm nowhere near Sunday school, but I think to myself, what would my kids think if they saw me here right now acting the way I am? Would that be something they would be proud of? Would that be something that I want them to emulate? A lot of times people say, like, when they have biological kids, they say like my children were a mirror for me to see my shortcomings, the things that I've done wrong. And I think to a similar extent, that can be the same with my spiritual children. The people that God has put under my authority, or under my like in Sunday school or whatever the case may be. That's
kind of a big ask, though. 'Cause,
absolutely.
I mean, if someone like me, I always said I would never do a teaching. I said I would actually never serve previous to this, but I for sure wouldn't, do a teaching service where there's,
because you don't want the responsibility of like someone to look up to me.
That, but also I know that maybe if I would have trouble teaching what I don't practice, but not only that is, if I'm not practicing it, is because I'm not 100% convinced of it. So how can I teach something that I'm not fully convinced on? And it might be my own lack of understanding, but even then it's...
I agree, but I guess my point would be, even if I'm not serving, I ought to work on those things. Even if for the time I'm working on those things outside of service, that's fine. But if I see those things in my life, if I say to myself, I can't serve because 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not just that I can't serve. I should also think to myself, but those should be improved in my life regardless whether I serve or not. What I was saying before is, when I serve, that can be an encouragement for me to continue in the spiritual life. But let's say, for example, you're saying, I can't serve because I don't do those things. The answer shouldn't be, and therefore I will not serve. The answer should be, and therefore I ought to work on those things so that by the grace of God, I can become worthy of service.
But that assumes that, if you follow that logic, that when you do start to serve, you're assuming that you're perfect or almost perfect.
No, I'm not assuming that we're perfect and almost perfect. Actually, one of the things that I tell people is, like, I give sermons every week, right? If I'm giving a sermon on only the things that I've perfected, it'd be a pretty quiet and pretty short Sunday, Mm-hmm. Like there are lots of things that I need to work on, and I continue to work on. But what I ought to be doing, if I'm going to be a faithful servant, is to be faithfully working on those things regularly. That's what makes me a faithful servant. Not necessarily sort of, definitely not being perfect, but living a life of repentance and continually striving towards the goals. When I talk to my kids about prayer in Sunday school, maybe I miss a prayer, but I go and I confess about my lack of diligence in my canon, and I try to fix it, and I try to do things to correct that, and I work on it, and I try to become more disciplined. So I'm working on those things, even though I'm not maybe perfect at them. We're focusing a lot about like teaching ministries, and I think that one of the things in teaching ministries I should know is when I'm teaching something, the lesson first is for me. And so when I give a lesson about fasting, or I give a lesson about confession or repentance or love or patience or jealousy or whatever the case may be. The lesson is for me first. I have not perfected probably any of those things.
I'm struggling to I feel like every time we mention something about it, it just adds on to the list of giving me more of a reason not to serve. It's like
because it scares you. It's intimidating.
It's going to be inconvenient.
Sure.
And you might not like it. And also you're going to be judged harder because these kids are looking up to you.
And actually in the scripture it says, let not many of you become teachers because you will receive a stricter judgment.
I feel like we're saying the opposite here. I feel like everyone should serve.
Well, everyone should serve for sure.
Is there a screening process for teaching services? Or
yeah, I mean, like most of the churches have like a pre-servants program where they give like sort of they teach the people who are about to serve basic elements of the doctrine so that they kind of know and be equipped. Something like the diaconate, you know, here in the diocese, by the grace of God, we have like rules about attendance and hymns and knowledge and scriptural knowledge in order to be appointed to the various ranks. So of course there's going to be different criteria. Not everybody is maybe equipped to teach, but definitely everybody's equipped to serve. As long as God has given me time and life and health, you know, of course I can find a way to serve.
Can you get kicked out of a service?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't think that that's something that people would probably, as speaking personally, I don't think that's something that I would go to sort of right away, but sure. Because a service is also, I need to think about it. Like maybe we've talked about it a lot about being difficult and a lot about how the things that make it sort of hard. But at the same time, service is a great privilege. Not everybody, you know. Actually, in the liturgy of Saint Gregory, we prayed just a couple of days ago. It says, "And we who have been called by your grace into this service, while unworthy, accept us to yourself." And so, like the priest is saying, it's a grace that God has given, that he's allowed me to serve, even though I'm not worthy of it. Because now I get to be like part of the work that God is doing. I mean, like if you think about it, like God's goal, like if God's goal is to bring people to the kingdom, and he doesn't need me to do it. He can do it without me. Mm-hmm. But he says, you know what? I want to include you. I want to include you. I'm going to include you in the work. Why? So I can also include you in the glory. You know, but he doesn't need to. And actually, that's a very humbling thing. Like God doesn't need me to serve. I actually need him. You know, actually, it says also in the liturgy of Saint Gregory, I love this liturgy of Saint Gregory. It says, I had no need of you, like you had no need of my servitude, but actually I needed your lordship. So like you didn't need my service. I actually needed your sort of authority.
I guess from an individual standpoint, that might be true. But if everyone had that same mindset, wouldn't the church just fall apart? If everyone was like, oh, we're unworthy of service, so, you know,
sure,
there would be no service.
I mean, technically, yes. But what I'm saying is God would not allow that. God would, by whatever means necessary. And actually, I've seen that sort of many times where it would look like, you know, there's no way past this thing, or there's this issue that cannot be solved or whatever. And actually, God resolves it because God's going to serve his people. And the question is, am I going to be a partaker in that service and partake in that blessing and partake in that glory? Yes or no? You know, the church is going to get cleaned whether you go and clean it or not. Mm-hmm. You know, the kids are going to get taught whether you teach them or not. The question is, am I going to partake in that to receive a heavenly reward, to receive earthly blessing, to receive the glory that comes with, you know, ushering people into the kingdom of heaven? Something
weird that I noticed, so I've never served before, ever. Growing up, it wasn't really, we had a very small church, and there's probably like 6 youth, and you know,
that'd be all the reason that you would find like anything to do.
No, but I was the youth. I was like,
you were the people being served.
I was people being served. Yeah. So like that's just kind of how we grew up. And when I you know came to Nashville, I was a lot older, obviously, but I had been away from the church for a while, and all my friends here were like, oh yeah, we all serve. I do this grade Sunday school. Oh, I do this service, and
yeah.
I thought it was so weird that, you know, I jumped from the one being served in like a very small community, and then I end up here where people my age and younger are serving, you know, the next generations. So service as a concept is kind of new to me.
Sure.
And I don't know if this is just my personal experience on what I've learned since we started this service.
Yeah.
Is that it feels really good to have a sense of purpose. Like,
right.
It made me very excited to go to church on Sundays, and like I wanted to really pay attention to prayer so that I could learn more, so that I could, you know, discuss these topics, and like overall it's been a huge benefit. And I'm wondering, I'm sure a lot of people have a similar experience, but I don't know what I'm trying to ask, but I don't think that's specific to just this service or just me.
It's not. And I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because what you're saying is what I was describing, but it's better to hear it from someone who's actually done it and experienced it, like there was things that you gained from this service that probably, even if I came to you in the beginning and said, here's the service we're going to do, you wouldn't have thought to yourself, and here's what I'm going to gain. And you gain those things. But at the same, and the flip side of that, some of this is pretty hard work. There's a lot of editing involved. There's a lot of work that comes into doing, a good job and producing something nice and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily easy, but at the same time, you feel God's hand with you. You feel a blessing when you do it. You learn. It helps you actually in other facets of your spiritual life that you would have never even imagined were related.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Something we talked about earlier, kind of before we started, that we were prepping for this service podcast, was what your motivation should be to serve.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so interesting because I'd never thought of it, and I don't know that it's common knowledge or something that's talked about very much. I might be wrong, but you said you should serve because you love Christ. Like that should be your sole purpose for service. And if you're serving without that kind of driving force, it doesn't really mean anything.
Nothing else is gonna be a lasting thing, and nothing else is going to sort of have the effect that it ought to. Because if I'm serving for any other reason, all those other reasons can eventually fail me. So I'm serving because I love these children, okay? And then I get a child that's not very lovable. All of a sudden, I don't want to serve, right? I serve because I see that it's a huge church, and I feel important having to give a Bible study to 60 kids. Then all of a sudden, when I get moved to a smaller church, like you were mentioning your church, and I'm giving a Bible study to 2 kids, I'm not interested anymore. Mm-hmm. So any reason that I have that's outside of the love of Christ is not going to be a forever reason, an eternal reason, right? There's going to be a place in which it will break. And so like the best way to think about it is when I am recognizing really what God has done for me and all the things that he's given me and the ways that he has served me while I'm myself and unworthy, my response is I want to do that too. I want to put it in modern terms, I want to pay it forward, right? I've been given this thing from Christ, and therefore now I want to give it to somebody else. A lot of people describe service as, in the Psalm it says that you fill my cup and it runs over. Mm-hmm. And so the concept that my cup now, God filled it. It's so full that it's running over. And what I want to do is use that overrun to fill other cups. You know what I mean? That's sort of the concept.
So you think that the love for Christ is a better driver than the fear of anything else?
Definitely, yeah. And in general, fear is not good a motivator in my spiritual life. It can be maybe sometimes a beginning, right? Sometimes people out of fear of retribution or out of fear for the commandments. For example, they know to keep the Sabbath holy. Therefore, they may drag themselves to church although they do not want to. It can be a beginning. But it ought to produce eventually fruits of love, or else it will not be able to be sustained.
Do you have to constantly, I'm asking you personally as a priest, do you have to constantly remind yourself that you're doing all of your services because you love Christ? Do you ever kind of just get into a routine where you forget why you're doing what you're doing?
Actually, this is a very good question. And I think that's something that not only me as a priest, but I think a lot of servants, because if you think about it, okay, I'm in a particular service, and then I get into the weeds of the details of the service. So for example, let's just take this podcast. You have to think about the cameras, the camera angles, the lighting, the computer equipment, the microphones, how I'm going to edit it, how I'm going to splice it, what it's going to look like, what media should I post it in. And actually, that can be very consuming. Mm-hmm. While I'm doing all of that, I may forget why it is I'm doing it. So, for example, if I'm working on those things and all of a sudden, you're rude or quick with me because you're mad that the angle's wrong and whatever because you want the perfect angle. Mm-hmm. Right now, all of a sudden, I've forgotten our main goal, which is trying to provide a service to those who might listen, and then I'm really in the weeds of the thing that I'm doing. So I think that's actually a very common thing that many of us fall into when we serve.
I think with this service specifically, I'm almost a little worried that it's probably pretty easy if hypothetically we blow up and, you know, millions of people see this.
I doubt it, but okay.
But, you know, it's more likely for that to happen with this service than teaching Sunday school.
Oh, sure. You're thinking of like vainglory and things like this.
Then what happens if it's like, oh, sure, now I'm doing it because...
and the thing is, so actually that's a good point for like the motivation, right? If my motivation is Christ, the love of Christ, then, you know, if a few people watch and benefit, that's great for me. And if lots of people watch and benefit, that's great for me too. Because if my goal was become a viral sensation, yeah, I'm upset if I'm not, right? But if my goal was, you know, preach Christ to whoever may listen, then if I've accomplished that goal, I should be satisfied.
That reminds me of your parable about the 6th hour worker and the 11th hour, or the
11th hour worker.
The one that gets mad because he
the first hour worker versus the 11th hour worker. Yeah,
that's what that kind of reminds me of. It's like, who cares what, you know?
Yeah, they both are like, I agreed with you to give you this amount of money. Why are you mad that this other guy also got that amount of money? I gave you what we agreed to. Yeah.
So how would you, or what advice would you give to someone on how to pick a service, or if someone is new to a church and they want to start serving and they don't know where to start?
Yeah.
What advice would you give them on how to pick a church service? Or
I think the first thing is, if they're new to the church, I think the first thing is for them just to attend the church regularly. You know, as a priest, I would like to know that this is someone who's attending church regularly, is taking care of their own spiritual life, has a spiritual father, is taking communion regularly. You know, I want them to be filled themselves, you know, for any service. And then actually the best way is, you know, to ask, you know, what is it that there's needed? And that's something that, you know, I wanted to touch on for a little bit is, yes, of course, ideally I would, you know, align my talents with whatever is needed in the church. And it would just like, I'm an amazing hymn person and they just happen to need someone to teach hymns, and it just kind of like works out perfectly. And that's wonderful. And sometimes that happens. But actually we see many, many times in scripture, people who were called by God to serve that were reluctant in service. And even they said, I'm not good at this. Like, for example, when God called Moses to free the people of Israel, he's like, I can't do that. I'm not a talker. I can't be the leader. Find somebody else. Actually, God was very merciful for him. He's like, sure, I'll bring you Aaron to help you, your brother, and I'll help you. Or, for example, when he called Jeremiah to be a prophet, he goes, I can't be a prophet. I'm too young. You know, so God saw something in him, and God saw something in Moses. Or even like Esther, when he was like, go see, like her relative was like, go see the king, and she didn't want to at first. She was worried, she was scared, but then she did it. And so like sometimes God sees something in us that we do not see in ourselves, and so we ought to. That's why I'm saying I ought to ask. There've been many times where me personally, I've put people in the service, and they've said, I would have never thought to do this, but actually I really love it. And I've gained so much from it, and I benefit so much from it. It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not part of my talents. It's not something I'm interested in. But now that I'm in it, I would never want to leave. I love it.
In the examples you gave, you're talking like with Moses, you're saying God himself called him to serve. Sure. And he was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. You know, kind of almost arguing with God.
Yeah. Or actually look at, for example, like Jonah. Jonah literally until almost the end was fighting, right? God says, go to Nineveh. He's like, yeah, sure. And then he jumps the other direction. He has to be brought back in the belly of a fish in order to preach to Nineveh. And even when he did, he was still kind of unhappy about it. He didn't like that they were going to be saved.
So when Abuna comes to me and says, I want you to do this service, right? Do I treat it the same as if God was the one telling me to do this service? Because even if, you know, Moses or Jonah are arguing with God and saying
it's God, so it's
how could you argue with God?
Sure,
much easier to say no to Abuna than to.
I think of course, you know, the priest or the servants coordinator that is speaking to me doesn't have the same authority that as if God Himself is speaking. Right. But at the same time, I ought to actually take that very seriously and take it as a calling from God and analyze that again with my own sit with myself. And sit with my spiritual father and not take it lightly. You know, someone says to me, do something that I've never done before or don't have a desire to do. Is my intention to serve God in the way that He requires, or is my intention to do the thing that is comfortable for me? If my intention is to do the thing that's comfortable for me, I will sit back and I will wait till I find the perfect service in the perfect time with the perfect people around me. And actually, I may never find that time. But if my intention is truly to serve, then I will be more open to doing something that maybe on its surface doesn't feel like would be the best fit for me. Again, that's not carte blanche to be like, you know, whatever someone says, I ought to just do it without thinking, you know, but I think having a posture of, maybe why not? I ought to consider it.
Is there any do you take away I don't know how to I really don't know how to ask this, but if someone loves their service, like someone landed in the perfect service,
Sure.
they it's what they want, it's what they're good at, it's what's needed.
Sure.
Is the blessing there less than someone who is doing it,
Oh, I see.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the one that has to struggle.
I mean, I guess that's really for God to determine. But I would say it's not something wrong to like what I do. Actually, when St. Paul talks about being a bishop, he says, "He who desires to be a bishop desires a good thing."
Mm-hmm.
And so he's not saying that like it's wrong for you to not like the service that you're involved. I know we emphasize a lot about sort of like just because something's difficult doesn't mean I should quit, but that doesn't mean service has to be miserable. That's actually, okay. I hope that's not the highlight that I want to come out from this. Like, yes, there are difficulties in service, but actually there are many blessings in service, and there are things that make me so happy about service. And in particular, like a lot of times they very much outweigh the trials or the tribulations or the issues that I may have within the service.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't worried that you should hate your service, but
yeah.
I worry that if you love it, if you struggle with it, you might not see all the benefits that could come from it, which would make you
one of the words of wisdom that I've been told before, and I think is really, really nice, is as much as I can, I shouldn't choose for myself. Like, I shouldn't choose for myself. Personally, for example, when Sayyidina called me to be a priest, he said, "I want you to serve in Nashville." Okay, I knew nothing about Nashville. I mean, I knew where it was on a map, but that's about it. Mm-hmm. But Sayyidina says this is a need, and I want to send you here, and so that's where I'll go. I didn't really consider too much about like the logistics of why there, and I'm not from the area. I really don't know the people. I don't know the place. And actually, God's blessed me. I feel very blessed to be here in Nashville and with the people that I serve with, and in the church that I serve in, and all those things. And that's from saying yes to God. Like when the archangel came to St. Mary and said, you're going to bear the Son of God and you're going to call him Jesus. I am sure in her mind, she's like, there are many questions, that she would have. Mm-hmm. But she actually only asked one. She said, how could this be since I don't know man? But she didn't really ask a million other questions that she probably could have asked. Mm-hmm. Her posture was, yes, behold the maidservant of the Lord, let it be according to your will. So if I can give any advice, it would be to have a posture of like, be a willingness of saying yes, to God and to service, so that I can be used as a tool in his hand. Otherwise, if I determine for myself, then I'm the one who has to, like, you made your bed, sleep in it or lie in it. So it's like, if God is the one who puts me in something, Scripture says, if God began a good work in you, he is faithful to complete it. And so if God is the one who puts me in this position, then I can call upon him and I can say, hey, you put me in this, help me. But if I choose for myself, it's almost as if I'm saying, God, well, I put myself here, so I guess I have to get myself out of it.
Mm-hmm.